Okay, hi. So, I am going to be doing a comprehensive Ruby Amethyst guide. This is everything that I have learned about the list from the time that I have played on Pixelborn as well as now. Um, and yeah, so I wanted to get this out before Set Champs. My first set at Champs tomorrow, as a way for hopefully other people to be able to prep for future events. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it. This will probably be low editing value, and I'm hoping to do more edited videos later. But yeah. So we have the set champs list here. So let's talk about some of my choices. We have the Magic Broom and Cusco's in here as two ofs. Part of the reason why is because I don't have a fourth copy of Mim Snake, and I don't count Mim Snake as a 2-drop. So I think that having that added value of having a couple more 6-drop, or being able to bring us to 6 drops that we want to have on 2, not can play on 2. You oftentimes will still play the Snake on 2, but it gives you that added value of being like, hey, I really want to play the Cusco on 2. And I find a lot of value within that. But if I had the extra Snake, it would probably be no Cusco's, and it would probably be an extra Maleficent. And then as for the Chernobog's followers and the Broom, I find 1-drops to still be of quite a bit of value, especially into matchups where they allow us to go ahead and gain some lore still, while still being able to be inked. They draw us cards. There's a lot of value in those. And then the reason why I'm running 3 Be Prepareds versus the Medusas is very simply just because I don't have a 4th Be Prepared. I would probably cut down 1 Medusa if I had that option, and then add in the Be Prepared. That way I keep the uninkable count the same. Be Prepared is on average the stronger card, but Medusa is really good at taking down some of those Emerald Steel threats after the Be Prepared comes down, or before the Be Prepared comes down if you play it on curve. Be King Undisputed is a very powerful card. It is in a lot of the newer versions of this list. A lot of people didn't run it before. But it is a Tremaine without the body, but it can be sung by your rabbits and your goats, which is very powerful. And also Maui if you don't want him to be reckless. So you don't want it. So, yeah. Let's go ahead and talk about the cost curve here. As I said, I wanted to keep the 1 and 2-drop slot with slightly higher amounts because we already have so many 3-drops, we have so many 4-drops, and I don't want to start adding in a bunch of 5 and 6-drops because a lot of the time it feels very hard to get to that point because of Emerald Steel and their relevancy in the meta right now. We are running 46 inkables and 14 uninkables, which is below the 15 value mark. So most of the cards that I draw, slightly over 3/4 of them is going to be inkable, allowing me to go ahead and try and play out that Emerald Steel playstyle that I will talk about in a bit. Ignore the card types, I just forgot to go ahead and add what each of them is, but it's mainly that we're playing character cards rather than them being songs. We have about 10 songs in the deck, I believe. 11? No, 10. And then 4 locations, and then something else. But yeah. So let's go ahead and look here at the value package. For people who don't know the decks very well, I'm just going to go into a little bit of what each of the cards do and their reasoning for them. That way you can get a more slightly in-depth understanding, especially for people who are watching this who aren't playing this deck. I think it's a very valuable thing to understand each of the intricacies of what the deck wants to do. For example, here we go ahead and have Merlins, which are bounce cards. So you play them, you get something, and then you put them back to your hand, and you also get something. Or when they die. But we go ahead and trigger that with Madame Fox and Madame Snake. And then those bring us back to hand, and we can go ahead and gain card advantage or lore advantage. And oftentimes you want some sort of advantage because you are a mid-range deck. And we're trying to just go ahead and get ahead in value and then close the game with goats later on if we need to, because goats are quote-unquote an inevitability, right? I would say don't be afraid to play early goats because they are incredibly strong as a body of a 4-mana 4/3, and they still tap. They're just very strong in general. And then as for more of the Ruby side of the deck, we have a lot of removal. And removal is a very strong way to win the game because it keeps us ahead and our opponents behind. You want to start out strong and then go ahead and close out the game without your opponents being able to play their cards so So Be Prepared is a really interesting example of this, because even though it says banish all characters, it isn't really on both sides, because we're able to quest and gain our value from our cards before our opponent is able to do that. And then they can go ahead and reset the board afterwards, but we were able to get our value. Then let's go ahead and talk about some of the combo cards in the deck. This deck has a very, very strong mulligan combo of Flynn Rider into Sisu into Queen's Castle. Flynn Rider goes ahead and says that if we have more power on one of our characters than an opponent's, we gain 3 lore. Note that if we have a tie, we do not gain the lore. So if an opponent goes ahead and plays their Maui into our Maui, and both of them are alive, we will not go ahead and gain our lore. But Sisu goes ahead and gains a lot of lore, or gains 2 lore, which is really strong, but it also goes ahead and gains that power, right? Which means that the combination of those 2 cards is very powerful, especially if you can play it on curve when your opponent still has lots of cards in their hand. And then finally we have the Queen's Castle, which is just a very, very, very powerful card, one of the strongest in the game, and that'll both gain us lore, it'll tank a lot of health for us, it'll draw us cards, and if our opponent cannot remove it, we will just win the game off of that alone. And this combo is really cool, but how often does it actually happen? Because that's 3 cards that we have to draw. So if we go ahead and look at the math, it comes out to somewhere around 36.8% of the time, assuming that we hard mulligan for it, so we go ahead and draw all 7 of our cards, we go ahead and put back any cards that are not part of that combo. So if you want to keep a brawl, it doesn't equate to the 36.8%. But that means that approximately 1 in 3 games, you can go ahead and automatically win, assuming your opponent can't respond with their best possible hand, right? So what this means is, if we are into a favorable matchup, this is likely times going to be an auto win, versus like if we're up into a negative matchup, you might not want this because we are not the aggressors in that matchup. And my math might be wrong. I can show the work for it in another video if people are interested. But I might also just be stupid because I struggled a bit. But yeah, a lot of hypogeometric calculating. But because mulligans are hard, it makes the game a lot harder to calculate. So let's talk about some of the win conditions of this deck. You are a mid-range deck, you fight early, you have staying power later, and your goal is to go ahead and play and gain lore whenever and wherever you can, but do it in a manner that is safe enough where you are not in a threat of your opponent. But because we are mid-range and we will lose if our opponents can make it to their late game, assuming that they are a stronger game in the late game, so most Sapphire decks, greed will kill us. So if you're greedy, acknowledge the reason why you are being greedy. Oftentimes, my opinion on card games is if you make a decision, you need to have a reason for it, or it should have been just so automatic that a toddler can decide that same decision. So let's go ahead and look at an example here, right? We have 18 lore, we have a Merlin with a -1 HP, so it's a 2/2. Our opponent has a Sisu and a Flynn Rider, and then we have the Mim Snake in hand. We have no more lore remaining. Do we go ahead and tap the rabbit? Are we gaining the lore to go up to 19? Our opponent has 3 cards in hand, they have the card advantage, but we have the lore advantage. So, what are your guys' thoughts on this? Well, let's go ahead and talk about it. It's a trick question. It's conditional. So, in this case, we go ahead and have 3 Merlin goats in our inkwell, right? Oftentimes, what I see a lot of people doing is their immediate thought and fear in their head is, hey, my opponent is going to go ahead and just play a Merlin goat and win the game, right? If they see that you're on 18 lore. Or people playing this deck might immediately think, hey, I just need to hit a goat to win the game, right? But the thing is, if you stick any character on the board once you're at 19 lore, you just win the game, right? If you can quest with them. So the exception is Maui, right? And in our opponent's case, right, because we only have 1 card in hand, their Sisu is not going to trigger their Flynn. So we are only at risk of giving them 3 lore next turn, right? In comparison to that 6. And what will end up happening here is they will trade that Sisu into the Merlin into our hand, right? giving us an extra card, which means that it doesn't matter that our Mim Snake could be a dead card in hand, because we have so many outs that we can likely draw into. Because we can draw into cards that draw more cards. We can draw into that last goat. We can go ahead and do lots and lots of things with our deck that mean that our opponent might have to go ahead and risk doing something like be preparing the hand, right? Or be preparing the board despite the fact that they're so far ahead because we have a Chernobog's Followers on our board. We have a 1-drop on our board. And I think that's part of that power of just tapping and being aggressive with our deck, right? There is no reason to greed here, so don't greed. And then I have another one, which is called Thinking in Flins, right? Let's go ahead and look at this board right here, right? And I want you to pause the video and go ahead and take some time. This is a far more difficult version of this question. So what is the line that you should do here? All right, so I hope you took some time to pause and think about it and decide your line. What I believe to be the best line here is to go ahead and throw the Maui onto the board, or play the Maui, and attack into the Mim Snake. So let's talk about some of those options, right? We have 5 cards into the Inkwell, right? If we were to tap 4 and play the Merlin Rabbit, we can't realistically do anything else with our turn, right? So playing the Merlin Rabbit is basically fake here, right? If we were to attack into anything with our Merlin Rabbit, what is that going to get us? We go ahead and gain a card draw, but that doesn't really do anything. So the only other play here is play the Fox. And there is validity, actually, to playing the Fox here. If we were to tap the rabbit, we go ahead and go up to 11 lore, we play the Mim Fox, and then we attack into the Maui. But the problem with that is we then need to go ahead and hit something that will either gain us stronger lore, or a stronger power than Mim Snake, or we would need to go ahead and hit a Brawl in order to kill off Flynn Rider. In this situation, I did not tell you how many Brawls are in our Inkwell. If you wanted to assume 4 in the deck, that's perfectly fine. But I also still didn't say how many cards are in the deck. It's a very difficult situation, right? Because I gave you a lot of that information that is unknown. But even then, the safe line will always be play the Maui here. We don't let them get ahead on lore because they're already ahead in cards in hand, right? And they're already ahead on board. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about our matchup guides here, right? We have Ruby Sapphire, which is, in my opinion, one of the strongest decks in the game right now. It is currently a top 4 meta where there are 4 decks that are far above everything else. But Ruby Amethyst will beat it because of the aggression. They cannot beat the Flynn Sisu Castle line, right? If you just gain enough lore early, they can never stop your goats. Your 1-drops are going to be good. And you just go ahead and keep gaining the lore early, and you just become stronger and stronger until they clear your board, but by that point you just play goats. Trying to get ahead in this matchup is really fake, because they are just so much stronger than you in the late game. By the time you hit 7 lore, they could be on 13. Or not lore, ink. They will likely be that much further ahead of you, where you don't need card draw, you just need to go ahead and get lore. You just need to win fast. They will ramp into strong removal cards, so you play fast, hit hard. Let's go ahead and look at Sapphire Steel, where we have Ruby Amethyst, which is absolutely a stomp, and they are made to destroy Emerald Steel. We roll over them and just absolutely destroy them. We win so consistently. In Bochum, there was a player who was named Justin. He did incredibly well with this deck, but he got some unlucky rolls and went ahead and hit Ruby Amethyst player, if I remember correctly, and he lost the game because of that. So if they run a whole new world, you want to inconsistently so that you can go ahead and lose as few cards from your hand as possible. If you don't know, just go ahead and play a good mid-range deck and you just win. They can kill your castles with an avalanche, so be wary of that if they happen to run the card. And they run 52 cards because they run 8 copies of Popsicle. They have the Fortisphere, which is the second Popsicle. And they just win late game because they have more ink. They'll go ahead and OTK you. So just play fast, be strong. Emerald Steel, the funny deck. So this is when we become the control deck. this is our one losing matchup into the meta, and their best mulligan will always be ours. So what you want to do is you just want to keep the brawl for their birds, make sure you have as many inkables in your hand as possible, and as many cards that draw more cards, and you just try and get to 7 ink and play a Be Prepared. And pray that they just don't get rid of it with an Ursula. But yeah, oftentimes you don't want to play cards unless they draw you more cards or you know it is definitely worth it for you to play that. And above all else, kill the bird. The bird is evil. If it is alive for that many turns, you likely already lost the game, because even if you can't be prepared, they are still going to be so strong, right? So. And then the mirror. Very simple, just play better 5-ed. So my list was made to be naturally more aggressive because of the more 1-drops and 2-drops, which means that in this matchup, if you are running a list more similar to mine, you need to be more aggressive and win first. Because they run more Be Prepareds, they have more board clears. And you do need to be ahead on at least lore, or the board, or cards, or you've basically already lost. You need to be ahead somewhere in some way so that you can catch back up later. And playing for the board is OP because you can gain more lore that way, but knowing when to greed for lore is important. But yeah, your Flins will oftentimes die to a brawl, or they'll be punched into, or there are many ways that it can die, Medusas, for example. And Flynn is considered a massive threat, but as you saw earlier, there are lots of ways to take it down by just matching that value, rather than going ahead and going above and killing the Flynn, right? And then Sisu in and of itself is lots of board control, and then the mirror struggles to kill the location. And back to that Flynn example, if we go back here to the thinking on Flynn's, because we played the Maui in this example, our Maui is still alive as well as their Maui, and they both tie at 6, which means that their Flynn Rider doesn't gain the value. So this is the reason why, if you don't feel the value in killing the Flynn and you believe that you can be the player with the stronger power at the time, I would say go ahead and keep the Flynn alive. It is a 2-mana 2/2. It is not strong. It is basically a vanilla 1-drop at that point, right? It's not strong. But yeah, otherwise, I would like to say thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me what your favorite part of the video was, and if you like the logic puzzles. I thought those were really cool. Let me know if you enjoyed them, and I might make them into short-form content. But I need to figure out a way to make the board look correct on mobile. And also tell me if I made any mistakes, if you think I'm wrong, because I haven't played in my set champs yet. I come from a competitive Hearthstone background, and I played a lot of Pixelborn before it went down. But yeah, otherwise check out my Discord, go ahead and reach out, because I am new to content creation, and I'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you.